Welcome to the podcast. We're so glad that you joined us today. And
we have a really great topic to talk to you about.
Topic. I mean, I really think we could probably never talk enough about this. When we go out and do events, I usually get the most reaction when we talk about this topic.
That's true. So 5 years ago, we did an interview with Byron and Francine Pirola,
yes,
who are good friends from Australia. By the way, Australian friends, invite us back. We want to come back. We definitely want to come back. But we had them on to talk about physical intimacy.
Yeah.
And marital intimacy. And it's something that I think that we just don't talk about enough as Catholics. We did have an interview with Ellen. You know, we have promoted, there's more and more resources now for Catholic couples who are looking for help in the area of their sexual relationship.
And a strategy of the enemy is to get couples to have as much sex before marriage and the least amount of sex after marriage.
That's right.
And there's something wrong with that.
It's very wrong. And you know why it's wrong? It's wrong because that is not the way to have the greatest sexual pleasure.
And that's not the greatest way to have a greatest marriage.
Right. Well, the greatest way to have
the best,
really using our sexual relationship the way that it was designed to be used is also when we do it that way, you actually have greater frequency and pleasure.
That's right.
As opposed if you kind of get things
out of order.
Yeah.
Right.
You get things out of order.
So this is a topic that we think is very important, but it also is not necessarily for younger listeners. So
if you haven't figured that out already,
right, yeah. So
you might want to put in your earbuds.
if you got little ears, right. Little kids around.
Okay. So a little intro to Byron and Francine, because we're just going to jump right into the interview part. Let's see. They are the founders of Smart Loving, and we have a link to their website in the show notes here. But they're even compared their website right now compared to when we did this interview 5 years ago. They have so many more resources.
Yeah, it's amazing.
On there for couples, not just about physical intimacy, but also about communication. They have stuff for engaged couples. They have stuff for just all different couples, no matter where you're at, using MFP, lots and lots of things there. But anyway, Smart Loving is a global Catholic marriage ministry dedicated to renewing the church through the empowerment of the sacrament of matrimony. And when we met with them, what is so interesting to me is that both of them grew up with parents who were in marriage ministry.
Yeah.
So they are like...
It's a family business.
Yeah. So they're like... children of, and they're older than we are. I mean, they've been married 37 years.
I feel like they mentored us. I feel like in the last couple of podcasts, we've talked about some of the people who have really been great mentors to us.
Yeah. But anyway,
wonderful.
But they're from Australia, which of course makes them more pleasing to listen to because they have a great accent.
They're wonderful. They're wonderful in and of themselves with their accent. It
just kind of puts it over the edge there, But they live in Sydney. They have 5 children and many grandchildren. I don't know how many grandchildren they have now, but before they only had 2, but there's no doubt they have more than that.
You will love this conversation. Before we jump into that conversation with Byron and Francine, two quick things. One, the family board meeting. We've talked to you before about the value and the importance of getting on the same page with your spouse. And we want to invite you right now to join us for the course that we're doing in April. We did one in January. It was awesome. We had a ton of people join us with that. And we'd love to have you join us for the family board meeting. We'll walk you through all the steps of getting a greater unity in your family, helping you create a vision, helping you, really equipping you to be able to do this on a regular basis so that you can have the changes that you've talked about, the desire that you may have in your heart for change. We're going to help you actually implement and work on making a shift in your family culture and the orientation that you as a mom and a dad in the ways that you lead in your home.
And we've set it up a little bit differently. We have more recordings and we have more mentoring time.
That's right.
So where you can watch the recordings and that are shorter, and then you can come to us when you're ready for the mentoring. Right. So it's very flexible.
It's both positives, if you will, because then it could be self-paced and you can keep going. But then we're also going to make ourselves more available for kind of some mentoring and coaching with you.
And also I want to invite you to come on April 13th. We're going to be doing a webinar for Easter. And so this is going to be April 13th is Palm Sunday. And we want you to come to this webinar so we can talk to you and give you some ideas for how to celebrate Holy Week with your family. And then also encourage you to start being really intentional about your family culture. So come to that webinar, or you can go and register for the webinar. The link's in the show notes here. And come on April 13th, invite your friends and celebrate Easter in a whole new way.
Okay. And let's jump right into the conversation with Byron and Francine Pirola.
Sex is such an integral part of marriage and our lives. Can you give us some kind of encouragement, some inspiration that the church offers us for, why is a couple's sexual relationship even important?
Right. Why should we even talk about this?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a very open-ended question, right? But why should we be excited about the joy of sex and not as Dr. Ruth would have it necessarily?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and when you've been married as for as long as we have, you sort of have to sort of scratch your head and remind yourselves. But I mean, just go back. We go back with we do a lot with engaged couples, and I mean, if you ask that question of them, they'd look at you like you're a nut, because they would be saying that's why we're getting married. That's not the only reason, but that's the longing.
Some thumbs up over on our people.
I mean, we'll tell you a funny story. We'll probably have some bad and some funny stories on the way through here, but we sort of, as married couples, we sort of forget that the desire for each other physically was probably the most powerful motivating force to actually get married. I mean, otherwise we'd just be flatmates, right? I mean,
right.
so it's actually central to the relationship. It's not something that happens or you get to do because the church says you can do it because you have to look after consolation prize for being married for this long. It's the essence of why we got married. This physical intimacy is the expression of our love.
And in fact, we would sum up that what the church teaches about sexual intimacy in marriage is wow.
Yeah.
It's just, it holds the sexual intimacy of the couple with such reverence and awe because of what it reveals about our God and our God's longing for union with us, that it's really very central to the whole redemption story. What we hear often of the church, we take it away is, no, you can't do that. It's all the prohibitions. You can't do that. You can't have that. You can't do it like this. You can't do it there. You can't, you can overdo it in this context. That's what we hear. But in fact, that's not the central message that the church sends us. And it's saying the church really says, wow, much more than it says no. And so maybe, we hope that through this time together, we'll be able to unpack some of that wow. And
which is also why it's such a tricky topic. So anything that is precious, anything that is, incredibly unique, because our love life is unique to us. It's never, this relationship has never occurred in human history. And the physical expression of that is something that nobody else participates in. So it's for that same reason why it's such a complicated topic.
That's right.
It's incredibly, we often say marriage is a contact sport, right? And contact sport, you can get hurt pretty hard.
Yes.
Right. And you don't intend to, but when you play, you play gridiron, right? There's some pretty hard blows in that game,
Right.
And so likewise in marriage.
the rules are really important because the rules help us to play the games, to enjoy it, but to play it safely.
Yeah, and so the sort of the church's rules around or guidance or whatever you want to call it around this stuff is because it is so precious and important, not because they don't so powerful. They're trying to protect us and protect it because of the wow. And so at a human level, frankly, it's one of the most intensely powerful experiences of our married life together, and it's a longing we have for each other. And at a spiritual level, it's the most intense expression of our love to each other. So it's a huge topic.
The word that comes to my mind and just hearing you to say that is vulnerability, right? And that vulnerability is one of the reasons that it is so unique between the two, the couples themselves. Like nobody can come into my marriage and say, oh, you should be having sex this many times a week, or you shouldn't be doing this. That's between us. Like you said, within the context, but what's so beautiful is that the church is there to teach us this is how to appropriately be vulnerable. I'm going to challenge a mother church. You know what I mean? Mother church challenges us to be appropriately vulnerable in the right way. But I think that's also why it's so complicated,
Right.
because it's so hard. It's so hard for us to be physically vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable, and it's something you really journey through your entire marriage, like your entire life. It's not like, oh, okay, we got it, we're done. No, you're still always learning new places, new areas in your relationship to be vulnerable, even physically, I think.
Yeah. And
I was going to say to that, Alicia, a really interesting and very helpful information that we've received from our research on this topic is that when you look at sexual prime, we peak in our early 20s. Now, physically, with it's talking about our, our peak of fertility, hormonal levels, and so on, and desire, and so on. It peaks in early 20s, but our erotic prime, which takes into the whole person and thinks about all that we are as a person and as individual and what we're exchanging and sharing in our lovemaking, we don't peak until our late 50s.
Yes.
So, yes, it's still at the best. We're still ahead. There were- And for when you put that into context, I mean, there's so much to keep learning, even if we're technically got it all down pat. In our earlier years, there's so much more for us to discover and learn about
Because
each other.
think about it, we've been married for 30 odd years now, and they have been odd years. And we know each other. Whereas it, as in love as we were the day we got married, but we know each other incredibly differently,
So true.
right? So what we bring to our daily relationship and what we bring to the bedroom is a person that is completely, is a different person. We've had 30 years of life experience together. We've been alive longer married than we were as unmarried people.
Yes. I remember us getting stuff.
We bring all that together when we make love. So if you think about it, that's an accumulation of intimacy. And every time we make love, our whole person comes to that, for better or for worse. We bring everything. And you're right, vulnerability is at the core of it. I mean, we just walked, it's Saturday morning here. We just went out and had a walk thinking about what we were going to talk about tonight so we didn't get in trouble. And we grabbed some breakfast and a coffee. Now, we had breakfast in public. But if somebody said to us, why don't you make love in public, on the table there, we couldn't do it. Not that we wouldn't do it, we couldn't do it.
The table was way too small. No.
You couldn't. Amazing. I'm not sure where you're going with. Well, no, just go. Well, me. I always get into trouble. Normally, you have to mute me. But it's just too personal.
yes.
It just would be incomprehensible, right? We have enough trouble with the intimacy between the two of us. Imagine with a crowd. So all that says exactly why it's so precious, so important, so exciting. Is it something that only we share?
Yeah.
Only we share.
Yes.
You said this earlier, but it just bears repeating. There is so much that we, even as good, faithful Catholic Christians, have been influenced by thinking the church, or what the world wants us to think the church is saying sex is bad or sex is wrong.
No.
Or even some of our families have raised us with this kind of a shame-based
Yes.
understanding of what sex is, or it's so forbidden that when you get married, there are still vestiges of, wait, is this right? Can we do this? Can we enjoy? Is it supposed to be pleasurable? Like, is it supposed to enjoy and God is the creator.
Awesome.
God is the creator and author of sex. He has meant it for our unity, for life. And it is wonderful wow of the church. And this is a beauty that too few fully appreciate.
So just to kind of just some of the questions that have come to us, and this is like a generalized question that people have sent us via email and different conversations that we've had. What would you say in your experience are common obstacles? And I'm just going to let you, answer that, and we'll kind of get into a little bit more specifics in a little bit. But what are some common obstacles that when in your ministry, and the couples that you've spoken to, that people come to and they have difficulty with? And then let's kind of deal with those common ones, and then we can get to more specific things later that people have asked us. But how would you answer that?
Well, we can just start with our marriage, let alone everybody else. Stress, busyness, lack of trust. We're not in a good space together. That makes it really hard for me, particularly, to be open and vulnerable sexually with Byron. Sleep deprivation. We have 5 children. None of them were good sleepers.
We didn't sleep for about 12 years.
And we couldn't agree. And the other thing is we couldn't agree. We've got very different parenting philosophies, and we couldn't agree on how to resolve it. So it's one of our worst arguments over how to get a child to sleep.
But just stay with a couple of those for a moment. When you're exhausted, everything collapses around you. Your relationship suffers. When you don't have that, is
We switch into survival mode, and because we tend to think of lovemaking as something we do for pleasure and for fun, it slips into that recreational category. And so it slips down the to-do list. It's not a priority. So, just surviving takes first priority, or, getting your basics done take priority over this really important.
Stress physiologically suppresses libido.
Yeah.
Your cortisol level goes up and your libido drops. I have a very high stress job, and I can tell you when I'm under stress, my libido drops. So you're not looking, so your desire for it drops. And then if you have the attitude that Francine mentioned a moment ago, that, our lovemaking is something we do only when everything is perfect between us. The stars are aligned, the kids are asleep, the house is tidy, the bills are paid, we've had a candlelit dinner. Well, we'll make love about once every century. That's the condition to put on it, right? Because it's just not our reality, right? And so, but if we took that same attitude to our verbal communication and said we'd only talk to each other intimately when the stars are aligned, the kids are asleep, you'd say you're insane. You've got to talk to each other. But we put our lovemaking into a different category. So we have a mental attitude of where our lovemaking is not as an essential element of our communication as married couples, but rather something we do for pleasure. And that's a real trap.
What's the antidote then to that? So if that's the problem to see it, what's the right way? Because I love that sex should not be a leisure activity. So then what is it?
Yeah, so sex is a sacred communication. And I think if we've always approached it, or not always, through our formation through our exposure to these programs, we think about it as 2 different modalities of communicating. There's a verbal component, and then there's the non-verbal physical, which includes amongst it lovemaking, which is the ultimate form of body language, if you like. So we're all familiar with the idea of body language, that we're communicating non-verbally through gesture and touch and facial expressions and hands moving around. And lovemaking is the ultimate expression within a marriage of body language, of a communication. So if we approach it as a communication, that begs the question of what are we communicating when we make love?
Right.
And this is where the wisdom of the church comes in, because the church teaches us that actually our lovemaking is putting flesh on the vows we took at our wedding. So I give myself totally to you, Byron. Hold nothing back. I share everything with you. I accept you totally for who you are. I give myself to you and to you alone. I give myself, including my fertility, and I accept you in the fullness of your fertility as well. So this kind of beautiful exchange of total gift is what we're saying to each other, and that's an incredibly important bedrock and foundation for keeping a marriage strong over the years, as different challenges come our way.
But we've got to be intentional about everything that's important in our lives, and we do that all the time. We're intentional about our finances. We're intentional about our fitness, or we try to be. We know that we should be, at least, right? We're intentional about, as a married couple, we're intentional about trying to make time together. We have our date nights. We do these sorts of things. We just need to be as intentional in our lovemaking. Now, that doesn't mean you pull your diary out and, hey, honey, have you got 15 minutes between 8:45 and 9:45 on Thursday morning? Because I've got a vacancy at that moment. That sounds kind of funny, right? But as your married life unfolds, you will find natural ebbs and flows in your daily routine that makes it more likely that you'll be able to make love than not. So we've gone from, sleepless nights, to a stage now where our kids are actually almost all out of the home. But I'm a night owl, so I work late. So the idea that we'll go to bed together and make love in the evenings is actually not in our natural ebb and flow. So we actually have to think consciously about when we,
Way to create this.
when we trace the space. Yeah, and it doesn't mean we have to do it. It just means we create space for it, and we do that intentionally.
Can I just a good analogy? We often get asked about, from dating couples, how far can we go? And this whole, idea of overstepping the mark sexually and so on. And our answer always is, well, that's the wrong question. We need to be thinking about what is the context, what is the environment we're putting our relationship into that takes us to a place where temptation pushes us past what we had decided where we wanted to go. And that intentionality needs to start. If you don't want to fall into temptation, you need to take precautions before you get into those situations of temptation. And in some ways, that same intentionality, we talk about the romantic atmosphere in our marriage. If we're not actively building a romantic atmosphere in our marriage and therefore creating the environment and focus and space in a busy life where lovemaking can take place, well, we're really kind of doing that in the reverse, where we're exiting from the opportunities by not even creating the space. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, there's one other I know there's a long answer, but it's a really good question. There's one other really important thing, which I will state, then Francine will explain, because if we do it to the other way around, we'll get it wrong. One of the big breakthroughs for us was to understand that the male and female sexual arousal pattern is typically, not always, but typically, because of our biology, quite different. And no one taught us this, and we stumbled across this through our reading and research later in marriage, and it was one of the biggest breakthroughs. Francine will explain what it is, because she's the researcher. But it's a really important insight. It really helped us. So we'll do it quickly.
So most of the research on human sexual response was done on men, mostly because their genitalia are on the outside of their body. So it's easy to put meters and probes and measures and things on that. And so you would have seen the classic pattern. We have desire. Sorry, you can't see my hand. We've got desire that goes up the curve. You've got the arousal. You get climax and resolution. So you get that kind of pattern. Well, that's a typical male sexual response pattern. So it goes from desire to arousal to climax and then resolution.
So I desire to make love. I'm now aroused. I climax, resolution. Right, and that's the typical male pattern. That's what we're taught. That's what we taught. That's what pornography teaches you if you actually fall into that trap, right? I mean, that's the whole mindset we have as a culture. You desire it, you get aroused, you orgasm.
Yeah.
Whereas for women, the desire part often isn't as prevalent at the beginning. For most women, the pattern goes more arousal, then desire, followed by climax and resolution. So
Very different.
Very different. So for a lot of women.
So like a typical gentle husband, I would sort of snuggle over to Francine and say, "Do you feel like making love?" And Francine can't lie, so she'd say,
I've got such a radical commitment to honesty.
She would say, "It's not really," and I go, "Oh, okay," because what am I going to do? Say, "Well, too bad," I mean, so right, and so then we realized this. And we both realized this. So I would snuggle over to Francine now and say, "Do you feel like making love?" And she says, "No, but I will." Right?
Yeah.
Complete breakthrough for us. And if you think about it,
Just once we get into lovemaking, that's when the desire comes for me.
but then when you
Like,
Alicia sees it this way. She says, I'm not interested, but you can convince me.
yeah.
but this is what foreplay is all about, for God's sake. I mean, we just so-called advanced 20th century, 21st century humans put some science around it, but this has been an age-old wisdom. Foreplay is actually bringing the desire to the woman.
Yeah.
Right? By and large, that's what it is. And if you think this is sort of somehow, sacrilegious or something like this, St. John Paul II wrote about this in Love and Responsibility. Right?
The responsibility.
And he's a husband, so let's just,
Yeah, I mean, so this is sort of, this is, so that little insight, right? If you put those two thoughts together, be intentional about making space in your life for your lovemaking, just like you do for every other important part of your relationship, and then understand how your relationship works as the male and as two unique individuals, but also as men and women. Then you've got a chance of actually building something that actually works for yourselves.
So I have kind of another question off of this, something that somebody had asked us, is that, okay, so say you do make that space, okay? You've made that space, and then when you come together, you have problems, they find it difficult to really be present. Because in our social media saturated, really quick world, especially with a lot of young couples who have grown up with iPhones, social media, instant images, all of that. And they're finding it hard to really be present, to each other. How, and say they do make that space. Say that, okay, we're making the space, but then when they're together, they're thinking about their phone or they're just finding it hard to calm down. What would you, do you know what I'm saying? Like to, what
And
advice would you give to?
that's certainly been our history, and we struggled with that aspect as well. One of the practices that we adopted very early on it was part of it's almost like a spiritual exercise that we promoted through our Smart Loving programs. It's called Skin to Skin. And it's a daily practice of being naked in each other's arms, present to each other. Now, it's not meant to be foreplay. It's a separate activity to lovemaking, but it's a practice of contemplation. And we liken it to that lovemaking is equivalent to receiving the Holy Eucharist, and that Christ gives us his body. We take it into our own. There's this one flesh union with Christ through the Holy Eucharist. Lovemaking is a one flesh union between husband and wife.
Take, this is my body given to you. Take, this is my body given. I mean, it's literally it's the same act.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the same act. It's got the same. Just 2 sacraments of intimacy.
Yeah.
2 sacraments of intimacy.
But we also have this beautiful practice of Eucharistic adoration, where we contemplate the mystery of Christ's present, body, soul, divinity, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. And that's the same essence of, I guess, of what Skin to Skin is. It's when we contemplate the presence of God in the body of our beloved. And it's a simple practice, sort of 15, 20 minutes a day, that kind of puts us into a headspace of I guess, a spiritual practice of intimacy. One of the important things about it that we find is that we often slip into a pattern of, I guess, slowing our breathing and deep breathing. It's a contemplative practice. And it can take, when we start it, we're often distracted and the mind's spinning and we're checklist of things we've got to do and so on. But that process of stopping, just like meditation or contemplation before the Eucharist, allows us to almost that big, deep, letting go of some of that stuff and the distractions. It takes a little while, but sometimes it's sticking with it in a disciplined way that just helps us release some of that. Does that sound credible?
Almost like taking that time, because they do say that like meditation, contemplation, almost it retrains your brain. I don't say almost, it does. It retrains your brain. And so you're saying take those practices and really apply them to your intimacy, to be with each other, and that because you can make the choice to be
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think also one of the issues is there's a male-female difference here, is that if our day isn't filled with what we call a sexual atmosphere, and I don't mean being sexual,
Romantic atmosphere.
but a romantic atmosphere. We're mindful of each other. We even if we're not, if we're in physically different places, we're aware of each other. When we connect and come home in the evening or wherever it might be, there's a gentleness between us. There's a conversation of intimacy between us. It's not just, information transfer, but how was your day? But we actually mean how was your day, right? Not just, how was your day? And by the way, when that's happening, our wives particularly, a female's primary experience of intimacy, again, as a generalization, is actually emotional intimacy. It's the emotional connection,
Intimate conversation.
which happens through intimate conversation. So the problem is, if that hasn't existed, what often happens is we schedule our lovemaking, but our wives feel like they're in bed with a stranger. And it doesn't worry the guys that much, because their primary, as a man, our primary experience of intimacy is physical expression. So we show by our lovemaking that we love each other, whereas our wives typically celebrate the intimacy between us by our lovemaking. So we have quite a different, I'm saying this very quickly, this is a long, slow conversation, but we have different approaches to intimacy, and our lovemaking has a different role in the expression of that intimacy. So for one, it's more of a celebration of the intimacy that's existed. And for the other, the male, it's often the way we achieve or express the intimacy.
Exactly.
Because men are physical, so they express their love physically. We do things for our wives.
The way that we say it is that women need to feel loved to have sex, but then have sex to feel loved.
Yeah. And that's why you don't just schedule 15 minutes in your diary because it's a physical thing like brushing your teeth, because it misses the point. But we have to build all those aspects, just like date nights and all those things build into our relationship. We also have to build space for our lovemaking.
We want everybody who is listening to this to have an even better sex life after listening to you.
That's right.
And one. And so those expectations, because I think I've never heard somebody talk about that level of skin to skin and that concept, right? And I think that sets you up to not let it become old. It's kind of rekindling the wonder. Would that be accurate to kind of put it that way? History, without it being erotic or arousing necessarily, right? Which is different, and I think so that this kind of goes a little bit along with that. But we've got some of the folks here who ask, how can we maybe just take another step in this? How do we increase the desire within us? They shared that there is they haven't always had fireworks in their marriage. They haven't always had fireworks in the bedroom. And how do they create a space where they can be more vulnerable or more open to,
you know what?
like, infusion the desire for, because I think they intellectually know it, but it hasn't been that powerful of an experience for them, maybe.
Well, I mean, I know that for me, my libido, of course, through 10 births and pregnancies, it's just like sometimes it's super high. And then after having a baby goes way down. And now I've been through menopause. So then that's like changing things as well. And so, like what do you do? And some people, maybe this in general, have a low libido.
Yeah.
How do you help to?
And no, stop. This is an impossible thing to answer because everybody's so specific, right? So let me give you some broad two things. The best, after 30 years of working with married couples, the best two, what we call spiritual exercises to build your marriage. And when your marriage is strong, your lovemaking, everything becomes easier. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it becomes easier. The two best spiritual exercises we have to offer is what we call prayer for passion and skin to skin. We just spoke about skin to skin a moment ago, but these are like two daily things. So let me explain prayer for passion. Passion is not lust. This is not prayer for sexual desire. This is prayer for passion towards each other.
And we would define passion as a desire for union and communion with the other. So if you think about Christ's passion on the cross, it was a total outpouring of himself in desire to be united with us forever. And so it's that desire for union and communion in the fullest sense of the word, not just for sexual release.
So we're praying for, Father, I don't feel particularly passionate, connected, open to Francine at the moment. Help me be more open to her. Help me be more desirous, not physically. Now, this is the whole relational sense.
So firstly, we've had very strong influence from Ignatian spirituality because Father Chuck was a Jesuit. So the prayer processing that he formed us in was, as a Jesuit, was what is the grace or the strength that you need? Name it specifically. So in this case, it's passion. Know and believe that God will never hold back from us something that will be good for our marriage and for our unity, because that is what he calls us to, is unity. So God desires to give us that passion because it is good for us and it is good for our marriage. If I don't have passion, I have to ask the question of what in me is blocking me from receiving that flow of grace. And so the prayer involves, take a minute or two, think about, why don't I want passion? Well, maybe it's because I'm hurt from an argument that we had or an insensitive comment that Byron made. Maybe it's that I'm worried about being overlooked or becoming a doormat or just being taken for granted. Maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed and unappreciated. Whatever it is, I bring that to the Lord.
Yes.
And surrender that. And if I do that sincerely and effectively, the passion is spontaneously there. So I can come back to Byron after that sort of 5-10 minutes of reflection and just be freer in being able to give myself to him without a kind of a conditional, I'm only going to give myself to him if he smartens up and, gives me some attention, or he, apologizes first or whatever. It allows us to come in with real generous and mature love that isn't conditional on the other person reciprocating or initiating.
So praying for passion, I can honestly say this, I've never been denied it by God. So when I pray that I can be more, you know, open towards, pray that I can be more connected to Francine, the graces I need to do that, I always receive them. That's not a prayer for sex. Let's be really clear. When we first explained this to couples on our seminars, the guys are going, "Oh, great, pray for sex." Yeah, and the wives are saying, "No way! I mean, there's too much of that already." I mean, and then they understand what we're talking about, right? And so let me just put them together for a sec. When you pray for passion, and you're practicing skin to skin every day, so not erotic, just physically present to each other.
Right.
Oh, we just naturally, it doesn't fix every element of our love life, right?
And it resets it.
But it resets it and makes it so much easier to connect.
Yeah.
Having said that, every marriage at some point in its relationship, the couple will struggle with some physical or emotional issue that is material, that they might actually need to get external professional help on. So, if you've been abused.
And this is important that if it is, you need to seek that out.
Yeah, you do. And, and you can have erectile dysfunction. You can have, postpartum. And we've all been through it, right? I mean, there's, too much stress. All these things are affected. So you've got to address those things too.
And
But that's not,
sometimes not even obvious. So to just give an example, and we've shared this on our weekends. I mean, you can decide later, Mike, whether this goes out to the public. When I was a young girl, I had an incontinence issue as a child.
you might cut this one out.
Primary school child. And I had this incident at school one day where I'd come in after lunch, I had a full bladder, and the teacher ignored me. I put my hand up, she ignored me, and I wet my pants in the classroom. And I remember with just primal angst, the humiliation. She sort of, grabbed me by the arm and marched me into the classroom next door. So now there was 2 classes of kids, to the principal to say, "Look what this girl has done," and that whole kind of shame and humiliation. Years later, we're making love, and I'm regularly experiencing a pattern where we would be just sort of getting into the rhythm of it, and I would sexually just turn really cold, like my libido would just drop right off, my interest. And we were on a retreat that had a very strong focus on lovemaking, a Spirit Catholic retreat that this couple was running here in Australia. And so we just kind of stopped with it this time and stayed with it in prayer. And this memory of this incident came back to us. So real clear indication from the Lord that this was the root of that particular pattern of sexual response in me. Normally what I would do is I'd just kind of, okay, look, just tunnel vision, push on, don't think about it. But this time, this day. So we were able to pray with it and find release from it. And I can honestly say that that hasn't been a problem for me since. Now, who would have thought that an incident in childhood, completely unrelated to lovemaking, like I wasn't sexually abused as a child or anything like that. It was just a really not uncommon thing. Like that's what they did with children who wet their pants, is you kind of applied shame and humiliation. That's how you taught them that that's not socially acceptable. Nowadays, we kind of know, oh, look, that's a really terrible, traumatic way to respond to that situation.
We've had it. We had one of the couples in our week, and he was a Vietnam vet, and had all the traumas of war. The only place it was still playing out for them was in their lovemaking. Right. So if you think about your lovemaking, the bedroom is the crucible where every aspect of our personhood,
Your life and your history.
your history, it's the most intimate moment in human. It's the most intimate human moment. Everything is, we're completely vulnerable. We're naked, for God's sake, right? I mean, so why do we expect all the things and all the baggage and all the stuff not to be there?
Exactly.
It's all there, and so we often have to deal with it. So, and this is so there are things we need to deal with, but I can say for most married couples in a normal, good relationship, the primary problem with our lovemaking is we're too busy. We're too stressed. We don't prioritize it. We don't create the space and the mechanisms just to be gentle with each other.
Right.
That's beautiful.
Well, let's take it on the other end from the people who have lower libido. How about when you have couples who have 5 children under the age of 6 and they are still desiring each other, and praise God, right? And they have to practice abstinence, and they are finding it very difficult to do that because God has given them an overabundance of desire for each other, which is a beautiful thing. So during those times, a lot of our couples, who are great Catholic couples who are practicing abstinence during times of fertility, want to know, like, what are some ways that but I feel like you've almost kind of answered this, right? Like, how can
It is brilliant for that.
connect? How can we connect with each other without,
Or going through arousal without going past that.
yeah, because honestly, skin to skin contact for some, I don't know if we could have done that when we were in our 20s and we were practicing abstinence. Like, I think that would have been too much, it would have been like a little overload, we could have tapped the brakes, like if it had been too difficult. But then how can they continue to express that love for each other during those times of abstinence? Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I think is enormously helpful is to obviously put the sexual relationship into the context of the broader relationship. So it can be really important, particularly at those times, for the wife to have perhaps a little more focus on the emotional and intimate conversation, and to use those times to develop that aspect of the relationship.
Right.
I mean, I guess we would still argue that with skin to skin, is that if done appropriately and with a prayerful intent, that I mean, we'd like to really, I guess, dialogue with couples who perhaps in that situation that you're describing where it might have felt like too much. We'd love to walk with couples in that circumstance.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges. I think there's some big challenges in this. Firstly, we come from all spectrums. We've got couples at one end can't be naked in front of each other because they feel embarrassed, ashamed, or and we've got other couples who they sort of will say to us that I couldn't possibly do skin to skin because I couldn't control myself.
Right.
Both those two statements might be true, but they're not healthy statements. If I can't control myself in front of my wife if she's naked, I mean, that's not a healthy place to be. Sorry, I'm sorry. And so one of the great generosities a husband has is his ability to actually withhold himself.
Yes.
Both through the lovemaking, but also in times of abstinence. I mean, Francine gets terrible migraines. Now, I don't, sort of demand sex from Francine because when she's got a migraine. I wouldn't think of it, right? I mean, that's an act of self-control, restraint, and it's a gift.
Yeah.
Right? I might be still longing for it, but it doesn't. So I think we've got to just get ourselves in check a little bit here. Is that the trick is to look at what's causing us not to be the way we'd like to be, and then find out. So if it's I don't have control, then why don't I have control? Or if I'm afraid I might lose control. I'm afraid I'm going to lose control. What am I afraid of? And why is that the case? If I'm ashamed of my body, well, why is that? That's not where God wants you to be. So I think, like a lot of things we need to do is we need to look at symptomatically at what we're seeing in front of us and ask why, what's happening here, in order to actually unpack it a bit. But I would say, again, there's extreme situations and all the sorts of things that happen. But if you just go back into the normal part of the bell curve for a moment, when we were taught natural family planning as a young couple, I'm a typical male. I asked the question that all the young guys ask us, because Francine used to be an instructor. The guys are taking aside and sort of say, what do you do when you can't make love? Well, the advice we had when I asked that question was go window shopping. And I was like, window shopping? That is really nothing. You mean? Nobody's satisfied with that. She's not satisfied with that, and that's like death to me. But there was nothing constructive. Whereas we said to couples, practice skin to skin. You mightn't be. I mean, if we use the Eucharistic, analogy for a moment,
The adoration.
it mightn't be appropriate for you to partake in the Eucharist at the moment. You might be in a state of discord or whatever, where it's not appropriate, but you can still go to Eucharistic adoration. Right. And
it increases your desire to receive the Eucharist. That's actually what it should do. Adoration should increase our desire to be united with Christ in the one flesh union through the Eucharist. But if there's something in my life that is preventing me from doing that, that doesn't mean that I should diminish the desire. That desire is there to pull me towards reforming my life.
We also have couples who say to us, well, you couldn't possibly be naked and touch each other in a period of abstinence because you might lose control and therefore, you might do something immoral or you might, well, you've got to make your judgments. But I think the question all the time is, life's a journey. We're growing people. We're absolutely imperfect. So, look at all that. If we're looking at the symptoms all the time and asking ourselves why and what do I want to do about it and being intentional about it, then we start to build the life and the relationship we desire to have rather than the one we just happen to be inheriting by accident.
So it's really taking the opportunity to, instead of saying, well, this is causing me to lose control and possibly putting me in a neurocation of sin of masturbation or whatever. And instead of saying, well, I'm not going to put myself in that situation, let me maybe grow in virtue and say, okay, how can I find a way to increase my self-control, increase our self-control so we can come together, so we can engage in more of a vulnerability in our relationship without, is that what you're saying?
That sounds like you've said it much better than we did. We'll have what you're having.
This might be, you might want to edit this one out as well, but we had a beautiful young couple come to us once and they wanted to talk about, they'd been married for a while and they wanted to talk about some of they were struggling with their views on sexual practice. Now let's be clear, we're not sex therapists. We're not marriage counselors. We're not theologians. We're not moral. We're not philosophers. We've got expertise in the area. We know the church teaching pretty well. The question they wanted to ask was, can we have oral sex? He wanted to have oral sex and she wasn't sure it was right, etc. So we unpacked the topic with them to a point and we went on a journey with what was the church's teaching on this as a couple. It's very hard to find these things. Where's the book that says,
right.
It's very hard. And you sort of don't ask your parents these sorts of things. So, and you don't
when we're doing this, Byron, that's what.
So we basically unpacked, the church's teaching, which is our lovemaking ought to be in the sense of it's vaginal intercourse. And anything outside of that you start to have to really start to explore what's going on and why.
Yeah.
Right.
And is this of God? Where is this?
Is this of God, etc.? So
is this drawing us together and gone into us, or is it taking us somewhere else?
And they sort of knew the answer, but you had to sort of take them on the journeys because I used to say, well, why are you uncomfortable with it to her? And she was saying, well, this is what I believe the teaching is, etc. And why do you want it so much to him? And he was, oh, I love it, and we sort of, as they started, everyone said, well, yeah, but what are you saying to each other, right? So pleasure me versus, connect, right? And they're not, he wasn't a bad person and she wasn't prudish. They were just struggling with this. But it was sort of both humorous and sad but also encouraging to watch them move together on it.
Yeah.
As they're moving from it, he was sort of starting to understand this. So this is actually not really the right thing to do, but I still desire it. So we got to a point where and it sounds kind of, it had to laugh at, I almost had to stop myself from laughing. He said, well, what about on my birthday? And I was like, I felt like saying to him, come on, man. It's sort of like saying I want to sleep. I want to be. I want fidelity with you, but except on my birthday, and I'll go and sleep with a prostitute. I mean, did you hear what you just said?
Right.
But no, I was just going to say. So it wasn't that they were bad people. They were good people. They were just trying to find their way through the understanding to the right place, not a compromise,
Right.
but the right place together where they understood what they were doing when they made love.
Right. And I think that, again, the church has beautiful boundaries for life, for our love, for us to experience the joy that God wanted. And I remember a priest just recently actually talking about the sex is pleasurable. God made it so that it was pleasurable, right?
Yeah.
And foreplay is pleasurable when it is leading us to the fulfillment of God's plan. And he said, much like just eating food, there's nothing wrong with the pleasure of the food or having a wonderful meal, but you don't you become gluttonous, you become sinful in eating foods that
For pleasure.
for pure pleasure only, right? When it isn't ordered towards the good of the body as well as the enjoyment of that. And it was just a simple
Analogy.
simple analogy. It's not as deep or as rich or as profound as
There's that
sex is.
relationship between pleasure and purpose.
And so there is such a joy when people can experience, when those who are not enjoying the pleasure, if you will, of sex, that there might be something there. But when you're seeking pleasure alone, then there might be something there that's an
Not what God
issue,
wants.
right?
Right.
And but one thing I really just want to kind of emphasize that I think you drew out there is that particularly, I mean, it should be maybe all the time, but particularly in those times of abstinence, to dialogue, to really talk about this. Because I think people
Yes.
don't talk about sex and what they desire and how they feel respected or disrespected or what they feel. Because again, the
That was a
church,
big struggle with us.
yeah,
Feeling during times of abstinence, Mike feeling disrespected and
or unloved or
unloved.
undesired, and all
So we had to work through that through talking and communication.
right, which it heightened our emotional intimacy during those times
Yes.
that really then allowed sex to be renewed. And also too, I always felt like in those times of abstinence, it was always a natural check. My desire was still strong for us to come together, and it always kind of was a check. Are we sure we're not, open to what God is planning with our children? And
So we have 10 children. Because there's
and they've never been a problem, in some ways with that, right?
That's right. It's not as awful as, having another child, even though at the time, this is something I've been thinking about a lot too, is that at the time, there were so many times when there was such a fear of getting pregnant. There really was. And I now that we have 10 children,
Right.
and it's not that bad. They're all great. We've all survived. We're all healthy. But that fear, I look back and I wonder, where was that coming from?
Right.
And was that really of God? And I think a lot of Catholic couples struggle with that. And like, I'll let you speak to that. What would you say to that couple who says, we're abstaining 75% of the time because we are so afraid of getting pregnant? What would you say?
Um,
Now, of course, every situation.
Certainly, I'd say, look, fear is never of the Lord. I mean, the scriptures tell us that love casts out all fear. And so if it's grounded in that intense fear, that we need to look at the fear and take that to the cross and to really find out what is at the root cause of that. Because I think God doesn't want us to live in fear. So that would be the first thing, is that let's look at that. Sometimes I think there can be subtle things behind, like it's easy to kind of say, hey, it's so busy, we've got too many children, we're overwhelmed. But often the fear is even deeper. It's that perhaps I'm feeling inadequate as a mum, and I'm lacking value or sense of worthiness in myself. And that won't necessarily be evident. Or I don't trust you to be able to be, the husband or the wife, and because I've heard stories from both cases in both directions. I don't trust you to be fully present and supportive. So if there's a disparity between the two in terms of their genuine openness and generosity towards life. So it would be those sorts of things. And so I think rather than just settling for let's abstain and not have so that we don't get pregnant, it's an invitation to explore it more deeply, to really get to the root causes.
But I think, firstly, fear is never of God, but we live in fear.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. Our journey was, I remember being sick in the stomach to think at some certain times that we were having another child.
Absolutely.
So,
I was the one that was pregnant.
No, but so this is not like, we've got 5, you've got 10. The journey's never like, well, for us it wasn't. It was, really tough discernment. But here's something that was a real gift to us, and we only discovered later in life, this notion of what we call the one heart prayer, one heart discernment, which is particularly applicable in the case of fertility awareness. We practice natural family planning, so abstinence is part of our life. Mind you, abstinence is part of our life every day of the week anyway. We've been abstaining for an hour so far.
Good job. Good job. A nice couples video on, so we know they are as well.
And when I travel for business for 3 weeks, I abstain the whole time. Who would have guessed, right? I mean, no. Anyway, but this idea of one heart, the one heart, the same.
And we would do what we got this from our mentors, Ron and Kathy Fayer, an American couple who run a ministry called Living in Love. So just a shout out to them as well. So the one heart discernment, the principle goes like this: is that God will never desire something for us that is not going to be good for us, that he has always a desire for our ultimate good. Now, he's got an eternal perspective, so that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't want us to have any suffering, because sometimes suffering will help us in that eternal goal, but he will always desire what is good for us. So what our goal should be is to make the desires of our heart consistent with the desires of God's heart.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to discerning, is God calling us to have another baby at this time? The prayer is for, let my heart's desires be the same as your desire for us, Lord. And if the Lord's desire for us is to have another child, what tends to happen in that process of sort of surrendering and longing for that is that if there's fear, the fear gets dissipated and we're filled with an enthusiasm. We actually want to have another child so that we can joyfully pursue that. And if the Lord's plan for us is not to have another child, because the Lord doesn't necessarily want us to just keep reproducing in an unlimited way, perhaps even for a couple who's infertile, who's unable to have a children. So this prayer applies for them as well. If the Lord's desire for us is not to have a child, to fill me with the peace, with the fact that maybe that isn't going to happen or is not part of the plan.
So this is Augustine's great thing, is basically love God and then do what you want, right?
So if we
unite our heart with God, then our desires will be holy desires.
Yes.
And then you can stop second guessing yourself. Now it's hard to do, right? Yeah, how do I really know that
You need a really mature spirituality where you kind of take everything to the Lord and you don't play games with yourself around.
so that
I'm going to pretend this is what I want, or you've got to be very open to spiritual.
But this is the two big challenges practicing natural fertility methods, right? Yeah, what do you do? How do you manage abstinence? And how do you know what your intention should be? Those are the two big questions, right? Neither of those things were taught to us when we were engaged. We were taught technique. How to avoid pregnancy,
Because
basically.
they had a chart and interpret the chart.
But the real two questions are, now those are two wonderful questions. And this is why natural fertility, natural family planning, natural fertility methods is so enriching for your relationship. It brings these two conversations regularly into your daily life.
Right.
They are live conversations you have to grapple with. And so they take you on a journey of intimacy because you can't ignore them. Now, the trick, going back to our friends in the States, Ron and Kathy Fayer, they discovered this prayer just through their life experience. They had 10 children too. And she got to this insight because she said one day after the 10th child, she didn't desire any more children. She thought she was something broken spiritual, and she's praying to God. I've lost my desire for children. And she went to a spiritual director and said, something's wrong. And he looked at her and said, Kathy, you had 10 children. Maybe God doesn't desire you to have another child. He said, oh, cool. She went. And so I think
that was literally almost exactly my same experience after having our 10th. And I really thought to myself, if I got pregnant right now, my greatest problem would be, I would go to the Lord and be like, I really felt like I wasn't supposed to be pregnant right now. It wouldn't actually have been the pregnancy. It would have been the consternation of feeling like, wait a second, Lord, but I didn't get pregnant because I was my heart was one with the Lord's. And I can totally relate to that. Okay, I'm at peace now. We're going to get ready to wrap up our time, but I really did want to ask this question because a lot of people ask this. Foreplay outside of the sexual act.
Prior to
the sexual act, like the coming together. What are the moral bounds as far as privacy in the bedroom? People want to know, people ask, before you're married, oh, how far can you go? Right. But when you are married, there are also obviously contraception. I think we all understand that. I think everybody's on the same page. I think the church's teaching is clear on that. But within that, that understanding of man's semen is holy. This is sacred. Can you speak to that to kind of give a little bit of context within foreplay within marriage?
Yeah. Okay. Um, well, I guess at the simplistic level, that um, well, firstly, if I could just preface, it might be a slightly longer answer than you were thinking. That we've found that it's important to keep in mind that the pattern of arousal for men and women are quite different. For men, typically, it's a fairly straight A to B. The arousal is pretty uncomplicated. For women, it's not. It's like a squiggle. It's this way and that, and we start to surge, and then it backtracks.
It doesn't come with Google Maps.
And touching me in a way, and it's like it's feeling really good, and then all of a sudden, no, don't touch me there anymore. That doesn't work anymore. And even with eating, one episode. So I'm just
Where and men are more like the ever-ready battery. You just turn the switch. You know exactly where it's going to go. So you've got to work out how to do that, Danis. But I think then to get to the specifics,
because I think the reason you're saying that is that because foreplay might be very necessary, particularly for a woman, is I think the reason you're saying that up, right?
Yeah.
So not only just to start with that as a foundation, that foreplay is a good thing.
Yes.
It is a holy thing because it is preparing both, but particularly for women oftentimes. Again, there could be either or, but so good.
And it's also good for the husband as well, because it helps. Often men are physically ready for union, but they're not emotionally attuned to their wife. And the women might be emotionally hungry and ready for him, but she's not physically ready. So it's not an incompatibility. I think it's part of God's
alignment.
Glorious plan that by having this period of foreplay, it allows the man's emotional desire, a desire for emotional communion, to be sharpened and focused, and it allows the woman's physical desire to be increased as well. We've found that the goal of trying to have a simultaneous orgasm is quite a
it's easier.
it's not productive goal.
For some couples, it's really difficult, and for every couple, it changes over their life.
Yeah.
And so I think the goal is to basically have vaginal intercourse in the sort of the set in as the basic nature of what we're trying to do. And then the question is, what happens around the edges of that, and what's your intention? So if your attention starts to fall into what I'd call sort of I call it mutual masturbation, not of self, but of the other. Outer course. Some people call it outer course. I think you're now moved into a boundary area where we're actually not. We don't have an intention to go to that place. But some men suffer from premature ejaculation. It's not sinful.
It's unintentional.
It's not a sinful thing that happened. It just happened, and it's probably a difficult thing for them to deal with, right? Some women are a non-orgasmic, right, or aorgasmic, and that's a challenge for the couple to deal with. And then there's everything in between. So I think the question is, and this is a bit like we say to the young couples about sex before marriage, if your heart's aligned with the desire of what God intends for your relationship, if your objective is intimacy, right, and if you might start with an immature understanding of that, but don't just stop there. Get the understanding that goes for it, and then work towards always the desire that God would be wishing for you. And if we can have husbands and wives who can have very technically good sex, satisfying sex, but it's soulless.
Yes.
They weren't emotionally present to each other. It's a servicing. Well, that's not the intention either, right? It might be technically tick all the moral boxes, but actually it doesn't. It's just on the physical expression. So, and I find it hard sometimes. I find it personally hard as a male sometimes where we make love and Francine doesn't have an orgasm. I find that challenging. But she doesn't, right? And so we've got to...
there's a lot of unique... We've talked to a lot of couples over the years where the woman has, they've struggled for the woman to have an orgasm. And we would say, well, firstly, I mean, if she's okay with that, sometimes, particularly when I'm pregnant, I find it's much more difficult for my body to reach that climax. But I just really love being held and being close to Byron, and that intense sort of intimacy of and that's very satisfying for me, even without a climax or an orgasm. And so we had conversations around that, during our pregnancies that I think helped appease your sense of feeling guilty or greedy or somehow, negligent of me. Menopause has brought, sort of new challenges. Certainly the patterns of arousal have changed for me. So it's been sort of a whole relearning and a little bit slower perhaps as well. So we'll be having more foreplay than we used to.
8 play, 10 play.
The number keeps going up.
But I think to bring it to a close, though, I think, have a very clear objective,
Yes.
right? Don't fall into the trap of effectively sexual practices that are basically isolated on my pleasure or being serviced by each other. That's not the intention. The intention is a one flesh union, both spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Yeah.
And just ask yourself when you're finding yourself falling outside those boundaries, is this a holy thing that's happening or a selfish thing that's happening?
Am I becoming selfish? Am I focused on myself, or am I focused on the gift of self to myself?
Yeah.
Or is it coming from a fear or a dysfunction that we should address, but we're too embarrassed to? This is a very sensitive area, right? No one wants to. I mean, we talk about a lot of things, but we find it hard to talk about this.
Well, I think that in starting we started this entire conversation, how you said that beautiful realization that what's happening here has never happened before in the history of the world. And also to kind of connect that with, and the reason too, the fruition of that is a child, right? Because every child that comes from this union is never been created before in the history of the world. And our coming together is so intimate. And I think it's so good for couples to have a holy respect and honoring of their physical relationship, and to take the time to focus on it, to talk about it, because this is for the two of you. This is for the two of you. Like no other couple in the history of the world could be together the way that you are.
And I remember actually having a priest before we were married, and I said this, I think, in a podcast before, but it probably burned in my memory because it was a celibate priest who's wonderful and amazing, but said that the desire that you have for your spouse, as both a man and a woman, you have a marital debt to each other, and sex isn't something that is a trivial side thing, but it's something that you need to fulfill, and such that you actually, the goal ought to be in each of those times, not that it would always happen, that both of you do climax, that both of you do have this, and that you owe her a debt, that if you finish, you need to continue attempt to complete for her, so that she would climax. And I thought, I've never, it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think the church would be talking about this. I don't think a priest would be saying this. And the desire that God put in us for each other, for that union, is so beautiful and so sacred. And I remember how at the nuptial blessings, right, at weddings, talk about how this was one of the fruits preserved from the garden.
Right.
And I feel like that sex is when we as humans ought to be at least more emotionally, as you said, emotionally, spiritually, and physically aligned, probably more than any other action that we have, because they're all oriented towards the good of the other. Not that we don't, fall into traps and get busy and distracted, but that is the goal. And when we recognize
keeping that in your mind,
I am trying to give you a full and complete and powerful, amazing gift
of self,
right? And that can be very pleasurable. And if it's unpleasurable, we're probably doing something that may not be right, because I believe God's oriented this action towards our good, and that good is seen both in our moral senses as well as our physical senses. Would you agree? I don't know, but there's just something so beautiful, and I think we need to just embrace that.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as we did.
We love
it. Just again, this topic bears repeating. It bears refreshment, and some key takeaways here for you. Again, Smart Loving is a great organization. You want more information? Again, linked in the show notes here. But first, there's something so beautiful when you have something precious. It needs to be protected. there needs to be kind of boundaries and rules set around it. That's why the church has set up rules, if you will, has set up some boundaries to help make sure we protect the sacredness and the dignity of this beautiful gift, because it's such a vulnerable sharing of our intermarital relationship. We really want to have a clear understanding of how the church sets that up.
It was really hard actually to pull out like just the key takeaways, because I feel like there was so much that was said. But another thing that I wrote down for you to remember, that I think it's good to know that a person's sexual prime physically is in their 20s, but your erotic prime is reached in your 50s. And so this is a process. So this is a process of discovery that you go throughout your marriage, and things, and everyone who has a strong marriage later on in life will tell you that the sex just gets better and better and better. And I would totally agree with that.
And this is something we really try to incorporate as we talk about physical intimacy, really from the Pirolas.
Yeah.
But that's sexual relations can slip into a recreational category in our minds when we're just trying to survive and we're just very busy.
Right.
But the antidote to that is seeing sex as a sacred communication, something that needs to be prioritized. It's not something that's done when all the laundry's done, when all the stars align.
Right.
It's a sacred communication between spouses.
Okay, and then talking about the differences between men and women. That men go through a process of desire, arousal, climax, resolution. So that's a typical male pattern, but it's good for men to know and for women to know that for us, the pattern is different. Usually we need arousal or foreplay first, and that creates the desire in the woman and then moves to climax and resolution. And last thing, that we have to work on intimacy. It's not something that necessarily happens naturally. We get overwhelmed, we get distracted, we can be simply not present. And we need to work actually on that skill. And when we do that, our brain changes. We can train our brain to connect with our spouse emotionally, to be present there with them, and to really help enhance that intimacy that we share both physically and emotionally.
So we really think this is a great topic for your next date night.
Yeah.
So maybe the two of you can listen to this and go out on a date, and here are some questions for you as a follow-up after listening to this that you discuss together. How are we creating a romantic environment in our marriage relationship, and where are we making space for marital relations? Now, what does that look like? And then how are we opening our hearts to our spouse in lovemaking? Again, this is about not just a physical sharing, but a sharing of hearts and minds, as well as our bodies. And we can we work on being present to our spouse and retrain our brains to focus on them? Because this is about making a gift of yourself. And how can we do that more effectively?
And just to note too, that we have a downloadable guide to physical intimacy on our website that we've also linked to in our show notes. So you can go there and download it and also use that as a conversation starter.
All right. Well, this is an important topic. We hope this was beneficial to you, and some of these both key takeaways and questions will help you kind of carry this conversation to your spouse. Because again, our entire podcast is about you and your spouse having more time for some very crucial conversations about things that really matter. And this is a topic that really matters for your marriage.
Do you want to close with prayer?
Yeah, let's close with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus, thank you for the great gift of marriage, that you preserved marriage from the garden and you elevated marriage into a sacrament. Lord, may we renew and rekindle our marriage vows and the covenant that we made before you and through you. Lord, we desire to have a wonderful and abundant sex life, Lord, that honors you, glorifies your design. Help us grow in our marital intimacy. Help us grow and heal in ways that we as a couple are needing right now, Lord. Be with us and help us strive for your great calling in our marriage, and make all these marriages, Lord, stronger than ever. In your name we pray.
Amen.
Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.